Welcome to the Zachrilege cast. Dr. Kristi Winters, welcome aboard. And I can never turn that darn thing off before it goes off a second time.
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
My gong control is much like American politics at the moment, a little bit off kilter. Now, sometimes I start my show with an out-of-context quote from my guest, but this time I'm going to have an in-context. Well, I don't know. You tell me if this is in or out, because this is a Twitter comment you sent to somebody earlier today. And if you want me to spoon-feed you, admit you're a moron who depends on intellectually superior women to explain the meanings of short sentences.
Yeah, that's me fighting back against trolls. So the context of this is someone reacted to something I said, making a broad claim about something. And I asked for a specific instance and actually sort of provided a counterpoint. And they said, oh, well, I sent them a link to an article. And they went, oh, I'm that's behind a paywall. I can't read that one. Can you send me another one? It's like, you know, I'm going to do all this research for you and you're not going to read it anyway. Like, I'm just going to at this point playing with you. Like, hey, if I'm going to do this work for you, you know, it's like trick or treat. Do a trick. Show me your trick. Do the trick. So that was the motivation behind that.
Yeah, our brains haven't quite caught up to technology sometimes, because I will find myself like asking questions online and I realize, oh, I could have just Googled that. And sometimes it's like, when does this brewery open? You know, it's like very easy to find out, you know, stuff. It's not hard. It's like you gotta do the you gotta do the legwork. So this is a slightly different time. Usually it's like 8 o'clock ish, but we're talking to somebody in Germany. First German interview. Woohoo! So midnight there, 6 here. I am drinking the official beer of the show, Dragon's Milk, because why not?
Okay, so I had earlier an apple strudel liqueur that I got from a Christmas market here in town.
It sounds pretty awesome.
It's amazing. It does, and what they do at the marketplace, the sort of little cabin where they serve other kinds of food, is they heat it up so it's steaming like an apple cider, but an alcoholic one. And then they put whipped cream in it, and it's in like a little whiskey snifter. And then they dust cinnamon on the top, and they give you a stick so you can stir all the cream and cinnamon and the apple strudel liqueur together, and then it tastes like heaven.
Sounds pretty good. Yeah. Warm alcohol. Yeah, I got a couple beers there from Michigan. So I don't know, you know, the whole Wisconsin, Michigan thing.
Yeah, yes. Well, I'm from Wisconsin. Unfortunately, these days, the land of without democracy.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get there. And I do have to ask before we really get rolling, what did you turn down the chief of staff job offer?
Oh, not yet. Yeah, I got an outreach letter, but Trump hasn't actually formally offered me the job yet.
It is.
He's going down the list of everybody, anyone at this point.
It's kind of like being in America. It would be funnier if it were happening somewhere else. And I think we're often acting like there's an alternate dimension we can just jump into. Somewhere where like Clinton got impeached and Gore took over and like climate change was addressed early. Yeah, and W never happened, and oh my gosh, I should stop talking. It sounds way too awesome.
No. It's like how did I end up in this timeline? Well, why this one? Why is my consciousness residing where Donald Trump is president? Yeah, I have that feeling. The other thing I realized as we're going through it, because we're watching history unfold this week especially. I mean, we say that every week, right? But this week especially because of Michael Cohen coming forward with his sentencing and his allocution and the revelations that the parent company for the National Enquirer admitted that they helped funnel money in order to get campaign to stop Donald Trump from being basically held accountable for being a philanderer. And when I grew up as a child and learned about Nixon, I just kind of thought it must have been so traumatizing for the nation to go through Watergate and to go through the resignation of a president. And now living through it, I realize how banal it all really is. And in history, it's all compressed into one, you know, sort of timeline of inevitable events, it seems like, and then this big climax. But when you're living through it, it's just, you know, it kind of happens while you catch up with the news while you're getting ready to take out your garbage or make dinner or before you go to bed at night. And it's strange.
Yeah, I remember those every single week, because that paper is always like in the grocery checkout line. and it would always be some new attack on Hillary, some new attack on him. And then like they just stopped doing it because I think they knew they were getting sued or they were going to get in trouble. And National Enquirer all of a sudden was just like alien stuff, and George Clooney's getting divorced for the 400th time, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it all changed. You noticed some Twitter accounts disappearing or not tweeting for a while, like, uh-oh, who's in trouble now? But yeah, it is more, in a way, you want this whole thing, no matter what happens, you kind of want it to fast forward to be over, just because it seems like everything potentially bad could happen. But we're going to talk about good stuff now.
Okay, yeah.
Tangents are fine. We want to get on to kind of your own personal background, like how you got the doctor title and how you ended up in Germany. How does one get from Wisconsin to Germany? Even though I think German immigrants, started in Wisconsin, it's still a pretty big trip.
Right. Well, I grew up, I was born in a pretty rural area in central Wisconsin. The biggest town, which was like a 20-minute drive, was 24,000 people. So I grew up on a lot of top 40 radio because the other alternatives were AM radio, which was sports and Rush Limbaugh, or country music. And I don't know, I guess I was interested in politics from a pretty young age. I grew up in a time where Live Aid happened when I was a teenager. And so I learned about Amnesty International, and that brought me a lot of awareness of international events. And the one time I skipped school in high school, I actually called my mom and asked for permission to do it, was to go with a friend who they were driving down to Madison, which was about, at the time I was living about an hour and a half away, and we were protesting U.S. involvement in Central America. So like that was what I did when I skipped school. I wasn't a socialist, but I was very politically active, and I was very much a Democrat. I've been a Democrat my whole life. I don't remember not being a Democrat. So that's also part of the story. Got involved when I went to university in politics. I became a county board supervisor when I was 20. I represented the university residential halls district. Then I ran for re-election, and the election was on a Tuesday. The election for student government president was on a Wednesday, and I won both my elections. Then moved on to work on behalf of students for, it still exists, I think, United Council, but it's changed now because the Republicans who are evil changed laws about shared governance. But anyway, I went and worked on behalf of students for a year, and then got picked up by a campaign, a Democratic campaign, and we won that. And I got a bunch of jobs became available because when we won that seat, we flipped the Senate, and the Democrats took the majority. So a bunch of legislative aid jobs opened up. I got one of those. Was headhunted away to work for to run an office in the minority in the state assembly for a Democratic representative. Got headhunted away from him to work events for the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, where I put on events. It was supposed to be 2 events for Clinton, but both times he ended up having to cancel, and did one with Al Gore when he was vice president, and Clinton when she was the first lady. And eventually worked my way up to chief of staff for a Democratic member of the state Senate in Wisconsin who was on the finance committee. But then my life really changed. Like I had this track, I had a relationship, I had a house, and my partner at the time decided he wanted to go away to law school. So we sold our house, and then he decided actually he didn't want to stay together. So we split up, and my boss ran for elected office, and he didn't make it, but Jim Doyle was elected governor of Wisconsin, a Democrat. My boss went to work for him, and he took me with him. Unfortunately, he got in a fight with the governor the month after I joined his team, and he lost his job, and I was basically like, I left too. And at that point I decided, I was 30, and a friend said, well, look, Kristi, you don't have a mortgage tying you to one location. You don't have a relationship tying you to any particular location. And you've got a job opportunity. So what do you want to do, and where do you want to live? And I said, I want to do a master's, and I want to go live in Britain because I've always thought about it and dreamed about it and wanted to visit there. And I started applying, and I got accepted at all of the schools I applied to, but I chose the University of Essex because they did political behavior, and I was interested in why voters do what they do. So yeah, I got my undergraduate degree and then went on. And when I got to the University of Essex, there's a lot of interaction with the postgraduate community, because in the first year of the PhDs who hadn't received a degree from Essex before have to take a methods course on statistics and research methods. And the graduate students, the master's students, also take the same course. So there's a lot of first-year PhD student MA mixing. in that program. And I got to meet a lot of people with whom I'm still friends today, and I spar with, and they're great people in my life. But when I met the first year PhD students, I just kind of thought, well, I can do that. I had a research question, and I ended up being hired to be the senior research officer in the British election study for the 2005 British general election. And when I completed my PhD, I applied for a British Academy postdoctoral fellowship, and I won. So I was a postdoctoral fellow of the British Academy. I stayed in that job for 2 years, and during that time I founded the Qualitative Election Study of Britain, which is a qualitative study based on focus group data that we've now covered 2010, and basically most of the elections, the referendums or other things that have happened. We missed the alternative vote referendum, but that wasn't really a big one in British politics, so it's okay. And that's still running today. And the second year in my postgraduate, my fellowship, I should say, a job offer or a job announcement came through my email from a colleague who was in Germany at a data archive. And she said, please disseminate this job announcement to people who you think might want it. And I read it, and it was about construct validity, which is like a measurement issue in the social sciences. How do we take a concept like democracy and then we turn it into things that we can look at so it becomes observable? Because we can only measure what we can observe. And then how do we measure that observable thing? And then how close are we really measuring the concept in the first place? So that was kind of the basis of the job. And I said, I can do that. And so I applied, and I flew to, I literally, I flew into Cologne on a Thursday, stayed overnight. On Friday morning at 9 o'clock, I had the job interview. And at 6 o'clock that evening, I was offered the job. So I flew into a city and left thinking, okay, I'm going to live here. And picked up my life, emigrated from the UK, plopped down here in Cologne, have been here since 2011. It's been a great job, absolutely fantastic. I really adore my employer, my colleagues. My work is challenging, but it's stuff that I can do and get done, I think, pretty well. And I'm very, very, very lucky. That's the story. How many minutes was that?
It's like a debate. And time. Look at that. You just ding. Was it where they need the little xylophone sound or something when you finish? When you go over When you go over time. Yeah.
Yeah, when you get to be as old as me, and also when you move so many times, you have to tell your life story to so many new people all the time. And so I'm getting pretty good at quashing down about 46 years into under 10 minutes. So those are the highlights.
So somebody who's pretty darn accomplished in life, what made you think, hey, YouTube, that's where the smart people are. I'll go there and talk about feminism and...
Yeah, I started out focusing on atheism because I, in my naivete at the time, thought that the big issues about feminism were not really controversial anymore. I kind of thought that was kind of like moving the way of marriage equality. Like, yeah, there were some people who disagreed, but generally we all know women deserve equal rights, and, gender shouldn't bind people, all this sort of stuff. But I started off with atheism, and I also combined atheism and feminism because of my critique of religious patriarchy, which was a thing that I noticed about religion that wasn't getting talked about on YouTube. And when I went to YouTube to look for videos on religious patriarchy or feminism or any of those topics, I couldn't find any good videos. And I guess I've always been the kind of person you see a gap in something, okay, well, I've just created a job for myself. And at the time, I was just in a place in my life where I was good at, I felt like I should start something new. Like, I had kind of moved to Germany. I'd taken a lot of German. I was settled in. I'll never master German, but I'm good enough to buy food and eat, things that I've bought and not make huge mistakes. Given that there was this, I didn't see a lot of women. I didn't see a lot of feminist content back in 2014, early 2015, I guess. I just felt like, okay, I'll do this. And the other thing is, I had a talk with a friend. I said, I'm going to get a camera, and I'm going to plan all this content, and I'm going to record. And, I had all this whole plan about my YouTube channel that was going to be doing things other than making YouTube videos. It was going to be getting ready for making YouTube videos. And he said, why don't you just start tomorrow? And I was like, that's a damn good point. Why don't I just start tomorrow? And so I did. And because for me also, one of the things that I did as a graduate student and as a postdoctoral fellow was teaching. And okay, marking sucks. Marking essays gets so dreary. It just gets just grind. But teaching and the interaction and the energy that I was teaching statistics, right? It's not an exciting topic. So how are people going to get excited about understanding what heteroscedasticity is and why it's a problem for an ordinary least squares regression model? And I try to bring like an energy of explaining what heteroscedasticity is and giving them an example and showing them how we control for it. And like, look, you like now you better get a better picture of what the world really looks like through social science. Isn't that cool? And when I left teaching, I left that interchange, and YouTube allows me to kind of still have that, but then I get to pick all the topics. I don't have to teach to a course, and I also can give my own opinions, whereas in the classroom what I always tried to do was express a range of opinions, and I'll say, here's mine, but these are the ones that, here are, all the other ones and the critiques of mine and the critiques of theirs and whatever else. Whereas I don't feel the need to sort of always present the counterpoint if I'm arguing a moral position on my channel. So it's freeing in that way for me as well.
Well, what do you think the elevator pitch of your channel is like today versus maybe what it was when you started?
Yeah. At first it was, it's still kind of my tagline. It used to be like, I think, liberal, atheist, feminist, social scientist, nerd, or something like that. And it's still that. However, it's that in the era of Trump. And so in the era of Trump, I feel a greater responsibility to speak to more issues than as narrowly as an atheist focus would ever allow me.
Now, I think you do some of your your shows in podcast form. Was there a reason why you just chose YouTube over doing a podcast produced show?
Isn't it stupid? Because now I just put my avatar up all the time, right? But when I watch YouTube, when I learn best by seeing things and hearing them at the same time. It's why I almost prefer to see somebody give a lecture than read the book, that's the lecture is discussing or whatever, at least first, so I get a good handle on it. And podcasting was more intimidating because in podcasting, you have to have really good content for 25 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour. Whereas on YouTube, I can see something on YouTube and pretty quickly react to it. So it allows a sort of dynamism of reaction, and also a lesser expectation. I mean, Kevin and I turned the happy hour into a podcast. That's the one show that I do that is turned into a podcast because people asked us for it. It's long form. It's over an hour long. There's not a lot of visuals. We both use avatars because honestly, it's night when we make those shows. And the last thing I want to do at like 11 o'clock at night is go on camera. So I just want to relax and have a chat with my friend. So that's why. And given that they're really listening to us and not watching us, and YouTube uses up more of their bandwidth, they just said, hey, can you make it into a podcast? And we went, that's fair enough. We can do that for our fans. Well, I said that's fair enough, and I do it because Kevin's lazy. But I think but he appreciates it.
Yeah, the two of you.
He encourages me. Yeah. Yes. I'm dragging him up slowly. I'm making his sound better and doing more things. So, yeah.
So let's see. Can you remember these milestones in your YouTube career? Do you remember the first time you saw or got like an attack video by a not progressive?
Yeah, I think it was Sargon. I think Sargon was the first person who went after me.
Sargon, aka Carl of Swindon.
Yes, Carl Benjamin.
A popular character.
I think he was the first one. But really, to be honest, the first time I bumped against YouTube great awfulness was I inadvertently got dragged into another thing. I put out a video explaining why patriarchy is a real thing, because it is. It's I think the videos, there's a couple of them called Evidence That Patriarchy is a Real Thing. And Thunderfoot at the time was going after someone who's left YouTube now called Laughing Witch. And he made a response video to Laughing Witch, but in the body of the description box, he put just a random link to my video. And because he'd come onto my channel, I'm remembering this now, it's been years. He came onto my channel in the comments tried to claim something about patriarchy, and there's a reason why the Olympics has different categories, you know, why men and women don't compete against each other in the Olympics. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? And I called him out on his shit in the comments. I don't know. Can I swear? Is that all right?
Yeah, sorry,
Okay.
I should have said it in advance.
That's okay.
Cursing and drinking are encouraged on this show, but they're not necessary.
So anyway, I pwned him, or owned him, if you want to say, in the comments of my own channel, because I know social science and he's a physicist, so he doesn't know the social sciences, and that's fine if he wants to make a comment, but, you know, stay in your lane. And that pissed him off. And so he put a link to that video. So that video got like 10,000 views, but mostly driven by him, and then a bunch of people just coming on and hating me. So I guess it depends on how you want to, you know, operationalization again in the social sciences, measure response. Because he didn't actually respond to me. I think Carl was the first one, but he was the first time that I got a response to a video from a big anti-feminist YouTuber.
Yeah, that was a transition. I don't remember if Thunderfoot was one of like the atheist like YouTubers that I found like 3-4 years ago, and then everything made a crazy right turn. I don't know what exactly, but you mentioned some of the social sciences that there seems to be this push for people to like want gender studies to like disappear and like say social sciences aren't a thing. Do you feel like that's part of your channel kind of goal to remind people of the usefulness of this science, I guess?
Definitely, because when I come to a conversation, I always bring all of my experiences with me. And so when someone makes a claim, like, you know, Coach Red Pill tried to earlier tonight on the show that I did, I'm like, well, I don't know what you're thinking of, so can you give me an example? Bring it down to something observable and real, and then let's look at the example. And also to explain social science studies, like why is sample size sometimes important and other times sample size isn't so important? What's the difference between a psychological study, an experimental, and an N, and a sociological one? It's a broad-based survey. And I hope that I can, because I do have experience teaching statistical methods and also qualitative research, and I am a qualitative researcher, and I do survey analysis with, you know, I work in both methods, that I can help translate some of the misunderstandings people have because they read social science and they just bring whatever they understand about it instead of understanding what those things mean independent, you know, for the community.
Now, see, we're just going to have you explain things and sound smart instead of do a background yourself. That's just the direction we're going to go. I was just thinking, like, the whole, like, how kind of right-wing YouTube got so popular when the kind of videos that show how bad these arguments are seem to be pretty elementary, but the argument just keeps going. Like, you know, the whole patriarchy, or if you want to argue with someone about gender pay gap, you know, there's tons of videos on that. But if people, so what is it about that kind of mindset, since you are interacting with these people and you're seeing their videos, that appeals to people so much? Is it just that it's an easy answer to say that rape culture isn't a thing, or feminism is cancer, you know, that sort of thing, the Miloization of YouTube? Or is it just because someone has a really good British accent? Because I feel like a lot of these people have good British accents, and that's all they have.
That sometimes helps a lot. Sometimes that's all they have, as you point out. I think that there are people who are invested in the status quo, and there are people who basically, like, the concerns don't affect them personally, and therefore they can't relate to them. They have no empathy for them. And I think when you don't have that willingness to even hear somebody's complaint, you will, we know from psychology, you will go to arguments that will reinforce your worldview. So I think in terms of the way that power is currently structured, there are people in society who are advantaged, even if they feel disadvantaged by their personal, you know, individual locations, their intersections in society. And hearing other people say, you deserve more, or these people are complaining and shouldn't be complaining, or you should be the head of your household. God made you, you know, they gave you authority to rule over your wife and your children. And for people who have uncertainty, that might provide a lot. Attacking those things on an argument of human rights, which is what I think we do on the left, is a threat to their perception of their power, not to their actual power. And I think that's what the biggest obstacle is if you point out to men who dismiss patriarchy, how much patriarchy actually hurts men, they're really denying themselves the opportunity to make lives better for themselves and other men by listening and being open to that. But they're not. And I know every individual is, of course, unique, and I can't generalize about a whole group. But in terms of some of the impressions I get, there seems to be little actual engagement with the problems and more of a justification of dismissing why, or justifying why dismissing the problems is, reasonable. But I feel like I'm doing too much talking. Is this like, are you supposed to do some talking too? Because you said you were watching Thunderfoot and I was watching Armored Skeptic. And so, yeah, tell a little bit about your shameful YouTube past before they all went off the deep end.
Well, the only reason why I started on YouTube myself is because that was how a friend of mine told me I could burn the audio to do a podcast. So it became, and I think there's something to be said for a live format, kind of like what you do with Kevin and the happy hour. We should probably talk about that. It's all about you. It's not about me. Come on. Well, like I know my story, but then I'm like, well, you don't necessarily. But I started YouTube just because it was easier, and to see the transition that the atheist community has made, and I can see why a lot of people say, ooh, because the people who were like, religion is dumb, were like, oh, that argument doesn't go very far. What now? And then the great social justice battles of the last couple of years become a thing. But because you were doing like your own show, how did kind of like the community develop that was supportive of you? And then how did that lead to you and Kevin starting like your happy hour every week? And is it every week?
Yeah, well, it's periodic, I think is the best way to describe it, because it happens whenever we get around to it. And that's generally like he's free, I'm free, or something happens that we want to talk about. So it's rather spontaneous. It's another reason why we don't do it as a fixed podcast, because people have expectations and we don't want to let them down. But in a lot of ways, the development of the progressive community, at least the ones that I am, the YouTube community I'm part of, came out of a reaction, a self-defense against the attacks we were experiencing. The people that I've gotten to know through YouTube in the progressive community are people like Danny Quartz and Kevin and Michael Rollins and Tim Devoted to Your Opinion, and earlier on, Ranting Feminist and Go Fem Yourself and Christiosity, and also the one janitor, although he sort of moved on in terms of his topics. And all of us were being held up as objects of ridicule and strawmanned and misportrayed for cash by people who were anti-feminist and were selling anti-feminism, and they needed constant fodder. And what they started with were smaller channels of younger women who might be in a room or whatever talking to camera, and they would pick them apart. And their fans would go and just leave absolute vile in their comments, and they would shut down the video, or they would just leave YouTube. And so we saw that happening, and we started reaching out to some people and bringing them in to give them support, give them advice about how you can deal with your comment section, how you can do filtered words to take out certain slurs so that they don't reach your comment sections. You can review them yourself manually, all the things that we were finding helpful. And honestly, the most helpful thing was because occasionally it was everybody's turn in the barrel. Bering would put out a video about me, or Bering would put out a video about Tim, or he would put out one about Michael, and then all the trolls would come in. And in the group we had on Facebook, which Tim has talked about openly, so I don't think this, it just existed. But we would go there and saying, "Hey, I'm getting dogpiled again," and other people would say, "Hey, it's okay, and I support you," and Bering's a fucking asshole. And that was as much support. I mean, that was as important as all the technical things that we could offer as advice, just knowing that other people had gone through it. They didn't shut down their channels, that you could go and talk to them and get support and connect and just weather the storm, and then be a good friend when it happened to them, because eventually it would, And that was how the community, in terms of our connections and friendships and trust, built up. It was a reaction to the shitlords.
Well, it's good to see that there is this community of support, because when you start doing a podcast or YouTube video, you kind of find people go, "Oh, can I be on your show? Can you be on my show?" Vice versa. But then to find out that you actually, oh, I can support you in a time of need. And, it doesn't have to be a financial support. It can be just an emotional support, which is sometimes more important for people. So it's good that the two, you found each other.
Yeah.
Kevin and Rory Katz.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first person I probably interacted with was Steve Shives, because I was the first person to be a Patreon of his when he opened up his Patreon account. If you go back to the first video where he shouts out all the people who supported his channel, my name came up first. And I was on his Hangouts. And I'm close to Steve. I think he's fabulous. But in terms of friendship, Kevin is probably my longest YouTube friend, because he was also, when the Laughing Witch stuff was going on, he was sort of like, had his channel already. And we met and we did a couple, shared Hangouts. And the thing is that he really makes me laugh. Kevin he cracks me up. And because I have to walk a fine line about things I can say and things I can't say. Things, there's a filter in my head of, do I want this out on the internet forever? When I do things. But Kevin doesn't, his filter is much lower. So he can say things I can't, and then I can laugh at his jokes and reprimand him for saying naughty things. In the meantime, I'm laughing at them. So I think that the reason why the happy hour ends up working is because we genuinely we genuinely have a good time. Not like the Coach Red Pill one, we were like, that was kind of weird, because normally when we come off a show, the vibe is we're chatting or laughing and we're kind of talking about what happened in the Hangout previously and joking about it. But yeah, so I think that dynamic mostly comes through. I still read him sometimes too seriously, because he's so dry in his humor, and he'll just like say something like, he'll sound mad at me. And I'll be like, oh, don't be mad at me. Yeah. And he's just like, of course I'm not mad at you, you deaf woman. So yeah. And that happy hour is really just a spontaneous thing. Like we should make an effort to talk more often. And there was some YouTube drama. We just kept kind of having these hangouts to talk about the YouTube drama, and the happy hour evolved from that. So I think it's going to be going for almost a year now. This month, December of last year, I think, is when we kind of gave it a name. So happy anniversary us, I guess. I should look that up.
Yeah, the YouTube drama is like the Trump drama. Like, it is nonstop. There's always
drama,
like new news going on. And I figure we could talk about what's happening in your home state. So today, Scott Walker showed they didn't know what a Venn diagram is and signed the bills. Basically, in the state of Wisconsin, this is my best understanding of the situation, the Democrats are going to take power, but the Republicans passed some laws basically limiting the power and the ability to vote, which I always think, if you want people not to vote, that means you don't have much, right? But what do you, as someone who's from Wisconsin, and I don't know if when you made your U.S. tour, like when the midterms happened, if you were there or not, but
I was in Wisconsin for it. So yeah, I was there the night that Scott Walker lost. Yeah. Which was wonderful, especially because he lost his election by less than 1%. And earlier in the year, he had passed a law by the, he signed a law passed by the Republicans in the state assembly and Senate that said any candidate that does not get, it has to be closer than 1%, for there to be a recount. And he had 1.1% or 1.2%, I'd read. So he screwed himself by his own attempts to stop people from having legal recounts of elections. But it's even worse than you described, because I don't at this point acknowledge the Wisconsin legislature as a valid democratic body. It's not. It does not reflect the vote, and it does not reflect the will of the people. And it's now, if you look at the last election results, all of the statewide officers won. All the Democratic candidates won their races. And overall, Democratic candidates for the Senate and Assembly received more votes. I think the difference was like 300,000, like 1.6 million to 1.3 million or something. But Republicans took 2/3 of the Senate and the Assembly because of how they've gerrymandered the state. They are about one-party rule. And when they can't get one-party rule, what they do is they divest the offices or the offices that they can't control of any power, and then just hunker down and wait for another election where they can put somebody from their party back in power and then reassign a whole bunch of executive powers to that Republican governor. That is not democracy. That is a one-party dictatorship. It's a banana republic. It violates all the principles of democracy, and I don't acknowledge any of their laws as legitimate. But I'm not extreme on this or anything.
I live in the state of Georgia, so I feel your pain. It's like the guy
North
who was
Carolina.
the Secretary of State in charge of our state's basically kept people from voting and surprisingly won the election to be governor. And sadly, the Secretary of State like runoff went way in favor of the Republicans. So more third world country fun action in Georgia. Yeah, it's kind of around the country that a lot of that's happening. Like the Republicans don't fight fair, and I don't know like how the Democrats can do it without being total dicks, but they definitely don't need to start by saying let's meet in the middle. I don't think. But
no, and I don't hear.
I don't know. There's a difference.
But North Carolina, they tried this a couple of years ago. There, the Republicans did. They're also. It's not just Wisconsin. There's another state. Is it Michigan? They're trying to do the same thing.
Michigan, North Carolina too is.
Yeah, this is a systematic expansion of Jim Crow. And it's expanding not only the practices of Jim Crow across the country, but also is expanding who counts as the targets of Jim Crow. And it's not just African Americans anymore. It's anyone who votes for the Democratic Party, which is all the minorities, because what they're trying to do is preserve white male, rich white male power. That's the goal here. And they are going to twist democracy and twist the gerrymandering and twist the voting requirements until they can guarantee themselves that no matter what America looks like demographically, old white men make all of the decisions for all of us. And can I just say, fuck that. Like, we have to defend our democracy. We have to. It's, I'm not quite to the point of saying rise up. We have elections. There's still things we can do through the legitimate democratic process. But if they are going to strip institutions of their democratic legitimacy, then we have to rescue our democracy. Otherwise, we're living under oligarchy.
Fortunately, they're old, but they never die.
No, there's some new crop of old guys every couple years.
That's the problem. Now, since you live in Germany, and they had their history with democratic socialism, I mean right-wing totalitarianism, are there any lessons from
national socialism,
what Germany dealt with and how they deal with, it seems like, rising right-wing Nazism compared to what's happening in the United States, where it seems to be kind of brushed under the rug, but they're having trouble doing it because the rugs.
Right. Well, there's not a Fox News here. So that helps immensely. And there are, I think, if you look at the distribution of the political viewpoints of any population, you're going to find people across the political spectrum, from fascist to communist. That's just the nature of the distribution of, political views. But in terms of taking it seriously and sort of hand-wringing and doing and calling it out, you're much more likely, at least my experience is, you're much more likely to see that here in Germany. I'm just walking down Cologne. There's a smash fascism stickers. We have anti-Nazi rallies. They had a campaign going that if you're openly a Nazi, you're not welcome in this bar. So there is a more proactive sort of stance of, we're not going to tolerate your kind of intolerance here. We want people to feel welcome. You make people feel unwelcome, go away. So, but of course, I'm not an expert on German politics, and I don't watch hours and hours of German political news the way I watch MSNBC and CNN while I'm over here. And also some things on YouTube too that also cover things as well.
Of course. As someone who gets involved in polling, do you think that polling in general got a black eye when Trump won in America, or is it just that people don't understand math?
I actually, in part, blame the media because of the way that they present.
Left-wing media. Just kidding.
Yeah, and it's not a left or right.
Lamestream. Let's say that. That's up to date.
The media like really black and white stories. They like sort of simple narratives, and with their version of a simple narrative in polling is to focus on the point, like 44% or 56%. When you learn statistics and you learn about doing a survey, you always take into account the fact that you're dealing with a margin of error. So when we talk about a score in a population, you're usually talking about the average score for the whole population, but there might be a sort of a room for error of 3 plus or minus, let's say 3 points. So if a candidate comes out and they're scoring 44% in, let's say, approval ratings, you should really think about that as between 47 and 41%. because that's the actual, somewhere in that, we pick 44 because it's between 47 and 41, and we're 95% confident it's somewhere in the middle, and that middle bit is 44, but we're pretty confident if we went back and sampled again 1,500 times, 1,000 times, a billion times, we'd get somewhere between 47 and 41. And instead they'll say, oh, someone went up 2 points in the polls. If it's inside the margin of error, it's just noise. It's just, it could be a sampling error. Look at the margin of error. And if something moves outside of the margin of error, if they go up 7 points, that's a real shift, because that's beyond the 47 that was the top of the possible range. And I think if we presented polling with the margin of error alongside of it, people would be less surprised by the election outcomes, because they would see the overlap of, here's the Republican support and here's the Democratic support, and 3% of, or 2% of that support overlaps within that band of numbers, right? Then you can see that a 1 point or 2 point difference isn't really going to change things. So I think that we fundamentally should, the media especially, need to fundamentally rethink how they present polling data in particular, because even though they put at the bottom plus or minus 3% or 4% or whatever the sampling margin of error is based on the size and the hetero or homogeneity of the population from which the sample was drawn, then they don't make enough of a point to explain that when they say someone's gone up or down a point or 2 or 3. So that's my take, and much longer probably than you were expecting.
No, the long answers are good. But do you think that polling was kind of vindicated? Because in the midterms, the polling was like, oh no, they screwed up with Trump, so they're going to screw up again. And at the beginning of the night, it did look like the Republicans were going to do way better. And at the end, it kind of turned out actually better for the Democrats than thought. But it was kind of in line with that.
Yeah. That's when you wait for the results.
High five for that sort of thing. Yeah. You're just like, hey, this is what we do.
Well, I knew from the polling that it was very unlikely, and also just the math of it. I knew that the Senate was such a long shot as to not get your hopes up. And people on the left and progressives, I know, we fall in love. Republicans fall in line, or people on the right fall in line behind a candidate like they are behind Trump, and we fall in love with our candidates. But Beto O'Rourke was never, he was such a long shot in Texas. He lifted a lot of other people up. He doesn't get enough credit for his turnout helping other candidates. But for me, all the numbers really looked about the same. They didn't shift that much. The question was, how big was the blue wave going to be? Was it going to be 28 seats, or could it go up to 35? But I watch a lot of Inside Baseball. I look at what Nate Silver's saying. I look at the other more in-depth polls of the state-by-state races and how they're doing that stuff. So maybe from the outside, people like generals fight the last war. And so if the polls were wrong last time, the polls are going to be wrong this time. And generally, if the polls were wrong last time, they're not going to be wrong. I mean, occasionally the polls get things wrong, but more often than not, they get them right. And so I think there's a little bit of hesitancy that has less to do with anything, like a problem with the polls themselves, and more just the case that it's hard to predict the future, especially in the case of Trump, where severe, voter stuff was going on. And if you look at the popular vote that Clinton got, she won by 2 or 3 points, 3 million votes or something, and then ended up being about 2 or 3 points ahead of what Trump was, which is where the polls put her when they sampled a nationally representative sample. They got the vote right. They got the Electoral College results wrong in that case.
Well, based on what's happened in Wisconsin, Georgia, and various states where Republicans seem to lose, but they still win.
Yes.
How do you keep people engaged when they see the system kind of being rigged against them? And when I feel so bad for people in the state of Georgia who had to take a half day off work, and then they couldn't vote because they couldn't get there because in a few counties they didn't have power plugs for the voting machines that are from 2000. Anyway, rant over. But how do you keep people engaged and say, yes, America can actually be a progressive country again, and your input can actually matter from somebody in Germany? I know.
Yeah, that's a good question, right? I'm sitting on my ass in a country that has
German word for this. There should be.
Yeah, I love my country. I could never give up my citizenship. For all its flaws, I'm an American, and I hope that I try to exemplify what's best about it. What I've realized so acutely in the last 2 years is I've always taken our democracy for granted. I've always taken our democratic institutions for granted. And I knew the Republicans had been doing stuff with voter ID laws and gerrymandering, and I think that's just who they are. They've been doing it for decades. But with the culmination, especially of Trump, and maybe it's just the final, the gathering of all of these efforts now by Republicans to stack the courts, to gerrymander, to voter suppress, to cheat at elections, to accuse the other side of us not being legitimate when we win. This is an attack on our democracy. This isn't just partisan fighting. This is a different kind of fight. This isn't just about you guys need to go together and get stuff done. This is about one group of people want to shut the other group of the people out and then rule and tell you what to do. I know that for a lot of people who've been resisting Trump, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, and it feels like a marathon. But if you don't stand up for democracy every time you're allowed to vote for it and speak up for your democracy when it is being under threat, then when it is gone, you won't be able to speak. So you have to speak now, because you might not be able to speak later. Maybe the Republicans will find a way to change the executive and it'll be permanent GOP rule over Wisconsin forever. What do you do at that point? Then you're talking about revolution. All right. So the way to stop a revolution is to save our democracy now. And I'm being very calm. But, if I had a megaphone on a stage, I would be much louder. It's not appropriate for this mic. But I do feel that if you care, if you're willing to, for not the people on the left per se, but just general Americans who don't necessarily think of themselves as progressive, if you are going to stand and want other people to stand for the national anthem, then the least you can do is make sure that there's a democracy there that anthem means something for. So it's not just about progressives or fighting people on the right. There's a lot of unengaged Americans who are just free riding on the work of other Americans who do care about a democracy, and we need to get more people engaged. And the turnout at the last midterm, which was very high, historic, I think bodes well. I think people are waking up and seeing things that in their civics class, from the norms that they were taught about what American democracy and freedom should mean, they know that that doesn't sit right with them, and they're motivated to vote. And it's going to be the people that will either save us or not. So are you going to be part of the solution, or are you just going to watch as the problem gets bigger until we can't do anything about it? It's not very inspiring. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm hoping that it's always like out of the darkness before the dawn kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like more women ran for office after Trump got elected. Like if Hillary, I feel like America would be just as bad, if not worse. Like if Hillary had won, like wouldn't Republicans take bigger control of the House and the Senate?
Possibly, yeah.
What happens? They go against the president, and she'd be like impeached every other day.
They're still having hearings on her emails.
They never found anything. It's so amazing that with the Trump, like everything he accused her of doing, he did. And it's easily seen that that's the case. And maybe that's it. There's just like too much of that. I don't know. But
there is a weird thing in his psychology, because if you accuse him of something, he will accuse you of doing the same thing. But maybe when he initiates an accusation against someone else, like, whatever, that's really him projecting his own criminality and wrongdoings. So maybe we need to look at what he says more carefully as he's revealing all of the things that he's done that he knows are illegal, and is going to start accusing other people of, who obviously have not done them, of doing them.
I think one possible long-term result of what's happening now is like the next president, or maybe 2-3 presidents down the road, they're going to get kicked out of office for something really minor because of what happened here. Like we have to limit. It's like Trump's going to run for re-election just so he can't get arrested, basically. And that sounds bad, but just one voice. So it's very difficult for me to cut an interview down to 45 minutes with somebody who has such knowledge of so many topics.
I didn't know we were on a timer. It would have been shorter. It would have been more brief.
Oh, there's never, you know, we're kind of loose here. It's not,
Okay.
it's not official. We're not down to the second like some shows. But is there anything that I didn't cover before? I will, you know, you get to tell people everything where they can find you, but that's after you tell a joke. So if there's anything else you want to say before we call it a night, let me know.
No, I've got my joke source ready. We discussed this. I did get permission, so I'm gonna ask Alexa,
That's right.
yes, to tell me a joke. So hold on, I'll see what she says. You probably won't hear her, but let me know. Alexa, volume 10. Alexa, tell me a joke.
Doctor, I swallowed a fountain pen. What can I do? Use a pencil instead.
Were you able to hear that?
There you go. You can farm out the joking. The AIs will take us over soon.
That wasn't as good. Can I tell you the one I told you in the Facebook message? Because that was way better. All right. What did the cat say to its mobile phone?
What's that?
Can you hear meow?
See, we're very cat friendly on this show. So
Yes.
where can people find you online and
Yes.
do your shows and reach out to all your stuff?
If you go to the YouTube search engine and type Kristi Winters channel, because again, if you just do Kristi Winters, you'll get all the hate that I get first. It's probably old by now, but Kristi Winters channel. Most recently, we did a happy hour. I'm also starting to practice with open broadcast software, so I've been doing some Sunday hangouts. Last Sunday, I talked about the film Bodied, available on YouTube Premium, which is a rap battle film, and then the week before that, I talked about some diss battles going on YouTube rap. So it's kind of had a hip hop theme. I don't know if we're going to keep up with that or not, but it's been fun. So I do content and as and when it takes me. I stop doing shows because I can't keep them going. So whatever comes into my head ends up on my channel, and that's just how it goes.
Can we please get one happy hour, you and Kevin, to do a rap battle? That'd be awesome. Might be a short one, but it'd still be good.
It would be a very short one because it would be very one-sided. It would be me doing really bad raps, then Kevin going, "Yeah, I don't have anything. Do your next one. Insult me again. What are you gonna say? Is that one gonna have something that rhymes with potato?" Like that would be probably his reaction.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for Kristi for being on. That was like the Kristi Winters 101, people. If you want the 201, please let me know. But thank you for coming on and doing a midnight show. That is dedication right there, people.
Happy to. Thank you so much, and I hope people learned stuff or found it enjoyable. So thank you again for having me on.
Sounds good. Like